bit, and then I want to make sure that I turn the floor and the microphone over to you. That's the reason that I'm here in Denison, to listen to and learn from those whom I hope to serve as President of the United States of America. We've been in this campaign for all of 19 or 20 days, and already learning so much. And one of those things that comes out loud and clear, regardless of where I am or whom I'm listening to in Iowa, is that you take your role as the first caucus state that helps to decide the field for the Democratic nominating process very seriously. The questions that I've received, the comments that you've shared, the ideas that you have brought to the table, I guarantee you have made me a far better candidate than I would have been otherwise. And to come today and to meet with members of La Prensa, a Spanish language paper that serves 9 counties in this area, and to be answering these questions in Iowa in Spanish. Might have expected that in El Paso, Texas, my hometown. Pero estamos contestando estas preguntas aquí en su comunidad de Denison sobre cada tema, incluyendo la reforma migratoria, pero también el cambio climático, también cuidado de salud por todos, también democracia en que necesitamos contar cada voto, necesitamos escuchar a cada voz. We need to make sure that everybody in this democracy counts, right? This country has not been more divided. It's not been more polarized. It's not been more riven by partisanship in my lifetime, and maybe yours if you were older than I am. And so the answer to that is not more pettiness or meanness or smallness or division. We don't need any more name calling. We need this country to come together around shared challenges and opportunities. And we've got more than our share in front of us. I mentioned healthcare. Millions of our fellow Americans unable to see a doctor or to afford their prescriptions, sometimes even when they have insurance, unable to afford their prescriptions. Take their kid to a therapist. Be well enough to do whatever God put them on this earth to do. Go to school, raise your family, write a poem, open a restaurant, raise your family, whatever you are supposed to do, I want you to be well enough to do it. Yes, it is an investment in every single person's health care. And yes, it will cost us something to have guaranteed, high-quality, universal health care for every child and every woman and every man in this country. But if you're not compelled by the moral imperative of this question, of doing the right thing when we have the capacity, as the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, the most technologically and medically advanced on earth, then your own self-interest should compel you. Because those who do not get health care today, at some point down the road will, only it will be exponentially more expensive. The outcomes will not be as good. And those who receive it will be in no way prepared to pay for it. But you will, if you're lucky enough to have insurance in the first place, or if you're a taxpayer in the United States of America. The county jail system is one of the largest providers of mental health care services today. Just met a psychologist who told me that he treats a patient who throws a chair through a window of a restaurant like this one to get arrested so he can go to jail. It's the one place he's guaranteed to have a roof over his head, food provided for him, clothes on his back, and a prescription of psychotropic medications that at least temporarily make life bearable for him. If you have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or depression, I don't want you in jail where it's going to cost us more than $100 a night to take care of you. For a fraction of that expense, I want to provide you consistent, continuous, and preventative health care so that you are well enough to live to your full potential. In a country that has a crisis in maternal mortality, 3 times as deadly for women of color, I want to make sure that every single woman can go to a family planning clinic, get that cervical cancer screening, that family planning help, just be able to see a provider. So universal health care, yes, it means access to a primary care provider, the ability to afford your prescriptions, these premiums and deductibles coming down so they are affordable for everyone. But it also means mental health care for anyone who needs it at any time. And it also means that every single woman makes her own decisions about her own body and has access to the health care that allows her to do that. We have an economy right now that is working far too well for for too few. It's not working at all for too many. When you have school teachers in Iowa or in Texas or in any part of this country, educators, the librarians, the nurses, the counselors, the school bus driver, the cafeteria worker, working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, when you would agree with me, they have the most important job in front of them. That child whose lifelong love of learning, once unlocked, will make them unstoppable, by extension will make this country unbeatable. I want to make sure that they're focused on just that one job and that we pay those teachers and educators a living wage. I want to make sure that if they have to take time off to spend that with their kids, taking care of their parents, taking care of themselves, that we have paid family leave in every single part of the country. And if that teacher or that person who's working any job in America happens to be a woman, I want to make sure that she receives equal pay for equal work put in. One of the things that I've learned by listening to people when we're talking about making sure this economy offers opportunity for everyone is that when we graduate from those high schools with that world-class public school education, once we've begun paying our teachers and educators a living wage, we should be not only college ready and able to go to college if that's what we wish to do, and college that does not add to debt. $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt right now. That's more than all the credit card debt in this country combined. We have a 10% default rate already. Means a lot of people are sinking under this debt as we speak. Let's not add to any more of it. But let's also make sure that when you graduate from high school, you are career ready. And the unions in this country, whose power has been weakened and diminished over time, have not been able to connect those young people with the jobs, the apprenticeships, the trades, the skills, and the disciplines that allow them to lead lives of dignity because they found their calling, their purpose, their function, and the ability to command a living wage. And by the way, for those who've just finished raising their kids and want to return to the workforce, or that man or woman whose job has been automated out of existence, I also want to make sure there's a connection to one of those unions, to an apprenticeship that will allow them to learn that trade, that allows them to live a life of dignity. Economic opportunity for everyone in this country, regardless of your gender, regardless of your race, regardless of your sexual orientation, regardless of whether you live in a big city or in a small town. That has to be the priority of this country. And speaking of smaller towns and rural communities, the best way I know to lift them up is to listen to them and make sure that we are partnering with them. I learned this lesson traveling in Texas, where we visited every one of the 254 counties of that state. No matter how red and rural, no matter how blue and urban, we showed up to listen. We wrote nobody off, and we took no one for granted. I was in Silverton, smaller town, and a gentleman stood up, said he was in first grade in 1937, when Congressman LBJ, not yet then a senator or vice president or president, and President FDR invested in his community, partnered with Silverton, Texas, with the Rural Electrification Administration, making sure that that first grader could read by electric light, just like the big kids in Chicago or in London or in Tokyo or any other big city around the world. Made them competitive. Didn't give them a handout, did not take pity on them. Nobody wanted anybody else's sympathy. They just wanted a partner with whom they could make their community competitive. When I listen to farmers here in Iowa and around the country, they want to be freed from a reliance on commodity markets. They want to be able to add value to what they grow. They want to participate in making sure that we meet the greatest challenge the human race has ever faced. The fact that if this climate warms another degree Celsius, train is off the tracks. It's going to be very hard for us to get it back. We're seeing record flooding from the Missouri River right now. I think we're at 4 times average what some of our basins and retention dams and the river itself is carrying. Highest levels that we've seen on record for as long as we've been keeping records. Those floods, the fires in California, the storms we saw in Houston, Texas that dumped 58 inches of rain, that'll be nothing compared to what we have coming forward. But farmers tell me that they want to do their part. They say open up technologies and markets for us to capture carbon out of the air, whether that is precision tilling and farming, whether it's an incentive to plant cover crops to capture more of that carbon, whether it's listening to those local communities so that there's a reason to be able to farm, an ability to make a profit, and the opportunity to pass that farm on to the next generation instead of subdividing it into housing or some other use that does not allow us to grow our food or fiber that feeds and clothes not just this country, but so much of the rest of the world. I want to make sure that everyone can participate. And when we say everyone, we mean everyone. In what is supposed to be the world's greatest democracy, we have too many people who are functionally locked out of participating within it. When the Supreme Court said that corporations are people and that money is speech, and therefore corporations can spend unlimited amounts of money to purchase the outcomes of our elections and legislation, it put every single one of us at a competitive disadvantage. When we have some states where based on the color of your skin, you are drawn out of a congressional district, drawn out of a reason to vote, drawn out of your democracy, we are not pulling forth the full potential or genius or power of every single one of us, all 330 million. So a new Voting Rights Act that ensures that there is one vote for every person in this country, making sure that we have same-day and automatic voter registration in every county and every state of the United States of America, ending gerrymandering, the process by which members of Congress choose their own voters instead of the other way around, and getting big, dark, unaccountable money out of our politics. That is the way forward. If we have true economic and political and democratic participation in this country, then we will meet the challenge of universal, guaranteed, high-quality healthcare. We will meet the challenge of one job being enough for every single American. We will meet the challenge, the existential one before us, of doing our best against the threat of climate change before it is too late. We will be able, as we discussed with La Prensa, to make the most of immigrants who are called to this country, who chose us, who left crushing poverty, brutality, and violence, yes, for a better life here in Denison, here in Iowa, in my hometown of El Paso, Texas, but they were also called to contribute to our greatness and our shared success, and they absolutely have. Imagine if we freed them to contribute all the way to their maximum potential. 1 million dreamers who know no other country but this one, who no longer speak the language in the country in which they were born, who, if we send them back there and they are successful against those long odds, will be successful for that place, not this one. What if we guaranteed every single one of them that they would not have to fear deportation because they're made U.S. citizens in this, their country of choice, able to contribute to their maximum potential? Those who are working some of the toughest jobs, meatpacking houses, our farms, in our kitchens, in our lives, able to come out of the shadows and again, fully contribute to the success of this country. What if we realized that if immigration is a problem, it's a great problem for the United States to have, because we are a country of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees the world over. Our genius. So we've been able to incorporate all of these people, all of their stories, all of their cultures into this one nation, this idea, this experiment, creating the greatest nation the world has ever known. We lose sight of that at our peril, at the peril of our children's future. So I want to make sure that this campaign is about bringing everyone in. No matter how many generations you can count yourself an American, or whether you just got here yesterday, no matter your race, your ethnicity, your gender, your sexual orientation, you live in a big city or a small town, you voted for a Republican last time or a Democrat, I could care less. Because before we are anything else, we are Americans first. We've got to make sure that we're acting that way. So thank you for allowing me to join you today. Thank you, people of Denison and of Iowa, who are helping to restore civility and decency to our politics and the conversations, because I know that regardless of whom you caucus for, regardless of whom our nominee is in summer of 2020, all of us will be on the same page. All of us are Team America. All of us will look past even the November 2020 election, as important as it is to defeat Donald Trump, towards the future of this country, bringing everyone together around our shared challenges and our shared opportunities. Thank you, Denison, for having us out. Beth, thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for your time. Cynthia Connell right here has got the other microphone, and she will take it around. Thank you.
Do we have any questions back here on this side? Over here.
Hi, Beto. I'm Lisa with the ACL Right to Vote.
Wonderful.
And I have a question. What would you do to reduce incarceration by 50%?
Questions about incarceration. I think we all know this, but it's a point that bears repeating. We imprison more of our own people than does any other country of theirs per capita. This land of the free. This country that was founded on the premise that we're all created equal, and the implication being to equal opportunity. We imprison so many people, disproportionately black and brown, so many there for nonviolent drug crimes, including the crime of possession of marijuana, a substance that is legal or decriminalized in more than half the states of the country. And what we know is that Americans of all races, ethnicities, and walks of life use marijuana at the same rate, but only some Americans of some ethnicities and races are arrested more often than not, do jail time, upon release are forced to check a box on every employment application form, making it less likely that they're going to get the job, are disqualified for student loans to improve themselves later in life. Some have called the system of justice that we have in the country right now, and especially the war on drugs that has become a war on people, some people more than others, the new Jim Crow, because it's been very effective in suppressing some communities from participating in the greatness of this country. So we must not only end the federal prohibition on marijuana, we must also expunge the arrest records of everyone arrested for possession of a substance that's legal in so much of the country. We've got to end a system that encourages the imprisonment of our fellow Americans by making it a profitable venture, ban for-profit prisons. And then we've got to look at some of the underlying structural problems that are systemic and foundational in this country, that go back to the first Jim Crow and segregation and the reaction to Reconstruction that we see continuing in this country today. Texas, my home state, was 50th in voter turnout, but not by accident, drawn that way to keep some people out of participation. So all of this intersects and is connected. Our criminal justice system, our economic system, our system of democracy, but that's the way that we get our prison population down, get people out into productive lives, raising their families, starting businesses, farming their land, whatever they're supposed to do. I want them to be free and well enough to be able to do it. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Behind you over here.
Yes, sir. Hi there. Chris Keenhold. I was born and raised in this town, and have since transplanted in southern Middle Tennessee. Analysts talk a lot about national security, and our number one national security threat at this point in time is our own debt. Our country is currently $22 trillion in debt. What is your plan on day one to combat that?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for making the trip. I know you were with us earlier today in Carroll. You're right, we're $22 trillion in debt. And as you probably also know, we are deficit spending to the tune this fiscal year of $1 trillion annually. So we are compiling and compounding the debt that we are already in with $1 trillion a year on this current trajectory. First order of business, day one, is we've got to repeal the worst of those tax cuts that amounted to $2 trillion that disproportionately went to corporations who are already sitting on record piles of cash, and the very wealthiest Americans at a time of historic income and wealth inequality. The people of the future, my grandkids yet to be born, will be reading their history books and will be unable to believe that when we had $4 trillion in outstanding infrastructure needs in this country, we had hundreds of billions of dollars of healthcare needs in this country, education needs, paying teachers a fair wage, that our solution in 2017 and 2018 was to cut a $2 trillion tax cut to the very wealthiest Americans. We're going to have to make sure that that corporate tax rate, which today sits at 21%, down from 35%, is raised not back to where it was, but to something fair, maybe 25, 26%, so that everyone is paying their fair share in this country. The wars that we are waging, you mentioned foreign policy, 18 years, we're in our 18th year in Afghanistan, and functionally and effectively in our 27th year in Iraq. I was a senior in high school. I'm going to be 47 years old this year. Senior in high school when George H.W. Bush announces U.S. military involvement in that country in 1991. And through every single successive presidential administration, we have been at war, and we are at war there today. Only we are also at war in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, and Somalia. That's just a half a dozen of the countries that were using deadly force to take the lives of others in your name and to put American lives on the line, and far too often to lose them. And that costs us trillions of dollars. So these tax cuts under George W. Bush, under Trump, these wars that we have been waging for so long in this country, we have to rethink our priorities. Invest in people and communities, the ability to have a job and to be well enough to work that job. We will not be able to dig ourselves out overnight, but we can put ourselves on a sustainable, long-term path to be able to do that. Thank you for the question.
Okay, on the restaurant side over here.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for coming today. My name's Eileen Saylor, and full disclosure, I'm a registered Republican, but I want to hear your message. But I have two issues that I would like you to speak to. One is the Electoral College. I think rural Americans are going to be at a distinct disadvantage if the Electoral College is banned, and it'll only be population centers that elect our presidents. And secondly, I wanted your thoughts on reparations. How do you plan to go about funding that, and who gets it? Let me hear what you have to say about that.
Two softball questions from Eileen at the counter. First, I want you to know that I'm grateful that you're here, and I really mean it. If you're a Republican, you're in the right place. If you're a Democrat, you're in the right place. If you're an independent, you're in the right place. And in Texas, we had some success with Republicans in this last race. My mom, who's a lifelong Republican, voted for me in this last election, so I know we can do it. In some ways, I think your two questions are connected. And my reading and understanding of American history is not perfect, but I think the compromise that resulted in the Electoral College was in part a compromise with slave-holding states who were able to count the slaves under their control, who had no freedom and no ability to vote, as 3/5 of a person for apportionment in the House of Representatives. Now, those House of Representative districts also represent the number of electors towards the Electoral College in each and every single state. I say that the questions are related because you also asked about reparations. What's at the root of the word reparation is repair, and it's not just slavery. It's segregation, it's Jim Crow, it's continuing suppression. It's the fact that African Americans brought here in bondage built the original wealth of this country and had no ability thereafter to share in the wealth of this country, compounded through redlining, inability to get a home mortgage, a loan, to begin to build wealth for yourself and the next generation, inability to participate in our political process, locked out of their very democracy, though they were U.S. citizens, though they fought in World War I, though they fought in World War II, unable to run for office or choose those who would represent them in office. So how do we begin this repair? Minds far brighter than mine have said that it must begin with the truth. There's a bill, H.R. 40, in the House of Representatives that does not set an amount or a process to begin cutting checks, but just says that every American should know the truth of our history, of how the wealth in this country was built, and that out of that sharing and that understanding, there will come actions and policies that will make sense going forward. So I don't have a number in mind. I don't have checks that I'm ready to cut, but I do think that the truth is owed to all of us, not just to African Americans, but to Americans from every background, every ethnicity, every walk of life. And to this issue of the Electoral College, perhaps a compromise that we could strike is that if instead of some states awarding all of their Electoral College votes to the victor in one fell swoop, What if they did it proportionate to the popular vote in each state, which would require the Republican and Democratic nominee to contend in every single one of Iowa's congressional districts, every single one of Texas's 36 congressional districts. Right now, between the nominating conventions and November of a presidential election year, neither nominee shows up in Texas because its electoral votes are already spoken for. If we allocated them proportionate to the popular vote within the state, you'd have folks campaigning in South Carolina, in Texas, in California, in Massachusetts, in Iowa, everywhere, listening to everyone, bringing everybody into their own democracy. That might be a path forward on the Electoral College that satisfies some legitimate concerns you have about the representation of rural America. Thank you for the questions. Appreciate
All right, we're over here.
Hey Beto, Chris. Originally, how's it going?
Good.
Originally from Iowa, living in California. We're excited to have you out west in a little bit too.
Great.
You probably know that the last time we elected a former congressman who had just lost a close Senate race 2 years before becoming president was in 1860 when Abraham Lincoln was elected. So no pressure. Any favorite past presidents you have, and how can we, learn from them? And times when this country is deeply divided, how can we rally around, the greatness that they had moving forward in the years ahead?
Thanks for the question, Chris, and for being here. I feel no pressure because I fall so far from any comparison.
Okay.
But you asked the question, who's my favorite president? Far and away, Abraham Lincoln. 2 days ago, I was in Washington, D.C., and we were staying on a hotel on 14th Street, the Hilton Garden Inn, and ran down to the mall, and you're right at the Washington Monument, and then ran west to the Lincoln Memorial, and ran up those steps. And for anyone who has not yet done that, either running or walking, it is a profoundly powerful experience to read his second inaugural address. And so check this out. You are in the midst of a war whose end you cannot fully see yet, although you're starting to see some momentum, and victory is at the end of the tunnel for the Union. Hundreds of thousands of your fellow Americans losing their lives in a contest to decide the future of the institution of slavery and whether the Union will be able to be held together. And in that speech, he's like, look, there's a lot of stuff going on here, okay? So I'm going to dispense with the formalities and just get down to the business. This is going to make or break us. This is the defining, deciding moment for the United States of America. And he says at the end of that speech, for the world, we are the last best hope of Earth. I think it bears rereading right now, given the challenges that we face. A country very divided, nothing like it was in 1860, but as divided as it has been in our lifetimes, for sure. Moral questions on the table right now. Climate, maybe the most compelling. What will we do to our kids and our grandkids? Because the scientists have told us on this trajectory very clearly the misery and hell that we will visit upon them unless we change course now and come together in order to do so. And at the end of the speech, when he's talking about charity for all and malice towards none, seeing ourselves in each other. Again, could care less, no me importa if you are a Republican or a Democrat or even a citizen. I just want you to know that you're in this country and that you want the best for this country. You're willing to do everything within your power. I can work with that. So I'm not running against anything or anybody, and certainly not another party. I'm running for this country, and I think we would stand to benefit from doing more to emulate that great man, Abraham Lincoln. Thank you for the question, Chris.
All right, we have time for a few more.
My name is Anna. I graduated here in Denison in 2017. So my question to you is, as a first generation college student, what kind of guideways or paths do you want to introduce either into the early childhood or either be in middle school or high school to give career paths? Because I'm in my second year as a paramedic, but due to, even though having 4 scholarships to go to university, I still have to work for a full-time job to afford that.
It just doesn't make any sense. And it's hard for us to explain to those people the future to whom I keep referring, and even to ourselves, why we ask people who are willing to work at the VA to take care of veterans who put their lives on the line for this country, who are willing to teach school or serve as an educator given the public service it provides, who are willing to be there for those of us in our most dire moment of healthcare need, as you are and as you will be. Why we ask them, in order to provide this public service, to take on so much debt. On average, it's $40,000 per graduating college senior right now on their backs from day one. And as you probably have found out, it's the one kind of debt that you will never shake until you paid it off or until you're in the grave. You're not afforded the same bankruptcy protections that we afford others for other kinds of debt. And so forgiving those loans for your commitment to public service, whether you're working at a VA or an in-demand profession in an underserved community, or teaching school or a support role in one of those classrooms. You mentioned early childhood education. Kindergarten, where education starts for most kids in this country at 5 years old, a lot of those kids are already 10 months back in reading comprehension, 12 months back in math. Their chances of graduating from high school, pursuing higher education, earning a living wage over their lifetimes are diminished from day one, with no chance to press pause and catch up to their cohort. So what if we invested in universal pre-K? What if we invested in debt-free, free community college and debt-free 4-year college at public-serving, publicly funded universities? Does it cost something? Absolutely. Nothing comes free. There's no free lunch in this country or in this world or in this life. But I see that as an investment that will produce a return through everything that you do, not just for yourself and your family, but for your community, for your state, and for your country. Those are the kinds of investments that we as a country need to get back to making. And I, for one, will support them, defend them, and articulate the need to be able to do that. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
All right.
Hi, Mr. O'Rourke.
Hey there.
Thanks for coming. I'm from Dunlap, just down the road.
Okay.
I'm really curious. I like your rhetoric about the college stuff, but then I'm curious how you pay for that, one, and then two, it's a whole other genre, but the demographic I come from is white, middle class, rural people. There's not a lot of Latinos down there. There's not. It's white people, and the friends that I graduated from school with, they don't necessarily have a connection with the rest of the country. Their biggest things are gun rights and things like that. So I'm curious, like, how you would maybe incentivize us as American citizens to get to know fellow citizens. Like, I think of the CCC during Roosevelt. I think of some sort of thing where kids are going to a different part of the country for a summer to earn that college that may be supplied to them. And so my question is how you might make greater social capital between the American people.
Yeah. What a great question. And definitely want to come to Dunlap and hope that you will introduce us to some of the folks that you're talking about that you graduated from high school with, that want to listen to them. Perhaps that's the best way for us to do. There's nothing that I can teach or tell them that I can't learn from them first. And so that should be the attitude and the posture that I take. And with your help, we will do that. You ask, how do we pay for these investments that we want to make in people and in communities? We've highlighted some of those. Reversing the worst of these Trump tax cuts, rethinking what we are spending money on today, wars halfway around the world that we have failed to define victory for. When will we know that we are done and that we have won and that people can come back? Countries into which we are plowing trillions of dollars ultimately to rebuild after we have invaded them. And you tell me if they are any safer today than they were before then, or if the world is any more stable thanks to the sacrifice that so many Americans have performed. As we think about new wars that this president has threatened to fight, he's threatened to bomb North Korea. He's torn up the JCPOA with Iran, the last best effort to stop them from obtaining a nuclear weapon. He's threatened to invade Venezuela. You tell me how many of our Latin American and Central American wars have worked out for this country. And además, they cost us billions, ultimately trillions of dollars to wage. Somebody else asked about the accumulation of wealth in our meeting in Carroll. There needs to be an effective way to capture so much of the wealth that is built up beyond the estate tax, when that wealth is passed on from one generation to the next, And I'm not talking about wealth of $200,000. I'm not talking about wealth of $2 million. I'm talking about wealth of $50 million, $500 million, $1 billion. There are some people who have done far too well in this economy, and they've done well in too many cases at the expense of those who have done nothing in this economy. And in order to pay for that investment so everyone can achieve, everyone is going to have to contribute to their potential and to their means. We have to have a true progressive system, not just in taxing income, which is what we have traditionally done, but also being able to tax and capture some of that wealth and making this economy more dynamic. I sometimes, although no analogy is perfect, will tell the story of the O'Rourkes, immigrants fleeing Ireland, famine, coming to a country because they had no other place to go to. They might have died had they stayed in their home country. Working on the railroads in Nebraska, in Tucumcari, New Mexico, ultimately in El Paso, Texas, where we have been for the last 4 generations. I put myself in the shoes and in the head of that mom in Guatemala who is contemplating a 2,000-mile journey with her daughter. Let's say that daughter is 6 months old. What in the world would possess you to do that? You don't do it for kicks. You don't do it to come here to take somebody else's job or to get a handout. You traveled 2,000 miles on foot in a car, a train, because you have no other choice. I mean, that's what I would do only if it were the only way to save the life of Ulysses, my 12-year-old, his 10-year-old sister Molly, and their 8-year-old brother Henry. I think it's what you would do as well. And so I mentioned earlier being able to see ourselves in one another. There perhaps is something that has exacerbated the division and the divide and the polarization and the partisanship in this country. And it's that we've got our faces on these screens all the time, every waking hour of the day. And I'm just as guilty as anyone else is of this. But what we have been doing is self-selecting those who share our same opinions, reinforce them, sometimes exacerbate them with things that may or may not be true. What we aren't doing enough of, but you in Iowa have set the standard, is getting together in rooms like these and eyeball to eyeball instead of eyeball to screen, asking each other tough questions, knowing that if you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat, that doesn't have to define us. Before we're either of those things, we are Americans. So I want to show up in your community. I want to show up everywhere. Listen to everyone. See what we can do together. I know no one person and no one party can do this. See what we can do together to bring the country together. And then yes, maybe there's a way to see past our differences towards our common goals and common challenges. It's the thing that we've got to do if we are going to make it. And that's where the real pressure lies right now on all of us. This moment is ours, and it's ours together. Thanks for the question. Appreciate it. Okay.
My name is Irma Guzman, and I'm currently a senior in high school. As a person who's just going to vote for the first time for presidential candidates, what advice do you have for the young people, and what would set you apart from other candidates for us to vote for you?
Thanks for the question. You said your name was Aaron? Irma, thank you for being here. And I'm excited that you're going to vote, and I hope that I earn your vote, and would love for you to caucus for me. But I'm not going to count on it, right? I want to make sure that I earn it, that I listen to you, because I think that's the answer to your question. I don't know that I've got any advice for you that's better than what you already bring to the table on every significant issue. Somebody was talking to me about gun violence earlier, and you mentioned guns in your question. We lose 30,000 of our fellow Americans to gun violence every year. No other developed country comes anywhere close. Now, the conclusion you have to draw is there's either something really messed up, evil, bad, violent about Americans, or this is a human caused problem with a human solution. In states that have adopted background checks universally, 50% reduction in gun violence in those states. Gun owners and non-gun owners, Republicans and Democrats alike, seem to agree with that proposal. And it's been young people who've been leading the walkouts in their high schools, the marches for our lives, who have driven that point home and have produced some of the change that we're beginning to see. House of Representatives just passed 4 or 5 weeks ago, universal background checks. Climate change, the youngest among us will bear the consequences of our action or our inaction right now. You're forcing the conversation that the country's having about either the Green New Deal or some other way to meet our obligation to those who will succeed us on this planet, creating the kinds of jobs that we need in renewable fuel and energy that not just allow people to earn a living wage, but allow us to do what we can while we still have time to do it. So I'm going to be with you where the energy, the action, and the leadership is. We were at Iowa State last night. We're going to be in Grinnell. When, Norm? Friday, tomorrow. We went to Fort Madison High School. So high schools, community colleges, or just here in this room with you, Irma. We're going to go everywhere to listen to everyone, and looking forward to following your lead. So thank you for being here. Thanks for contributing to the conversation. Appreciate it.
All right, this is going to be our last question. Here you go.
Hello, I'm Boone Lachar. I'm a 17-year-old junior at Denison High School. What I'd like to know is, how would you help reduce global warming without hurting the lower class?
Yeah. Question is, how will we combat successfully global warming without hurting the lower class, in your words? We know that the planet has warmed 1 degree over pre-industrial revolution levels just since 1980. And we know that we are the cause of much of that warming. Our emissions, our inaction in the face of those emissions, and the science that has been conclusive beyond the shadow of a doubt about what is happening. We know the droughts, the floods that we are seeing on the Missouri River, the storms that are raging all over this world, civil wars produced in part because of historic changes in weather patterns. You look at Syria, the greatest drought that country had seen, that prefigured the civil war that created the greatest humanitarian disaster that the Western world has seen since World War II. This is only going to get much worse unless we do something. So inaction is not an option. But we also know that those in the United States who have borne the brunt of the worst of climate change and pollution so far have been lower income communities, and far too often communities of color. And so there have been folks who've been working on this who've said, as this economy transitions from a dependence on fossil fuels and the emissions of greenhouse gases, at the forefront of that economic change and opportunity should be this very same communities who suffered the worst of climate change and pollution so far. The ability to train for those solar and wind and biofuel jobs that you see right here in Iowa. The ability to ride that wave of that transition and lift up their communities in the process. The 2 fastest growing jobs in America today are wind jobs and solar jobs. And there are some institutions that are training for them. In Tucumcari, New Mexico, which I mentioned earlier, where my great-grandfather lived as he was working for the railroad, they've got a community college that specializes only in the work that you do on those wind turbines. People are coming from all over the country. But to the question asked earlier, I want to make sure that everyone can afford that tuition. We're investing in everyone's chance to succeed, and by extension, this country's chance to succeed, and by extension, humanity's chance to succeed and still be able to be on this planet. So I'm very conscious of making sure that everyone is able to participate in the success, very conscious of the need to act while we still can, and very conscious of the level of effort that it will require. Some have compared it to the last major existential threat that we faced in the 1930s and early 1940s of Nazi Germany, existential threat to the Western democracies. This country, through our politics and our democracy, was able to galvanize hundreds of millions here and throughout the Western world to defeat Nazi Germany, at the same time lifting up millions out of poverty and into the middle class in this country. Just such an organizing, political, democratic, economic effort is in store for us if we do the right thing at this right moment, this defining moment for you, for me, and for those who will succeed us in this room and on this planet. Thanks for the question. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Denison, for having us out. Thank you to Bronx and to Eric and the staff. Thanks to each one of you for being here today. We are very, very grateful. Gracias.